The year was 2347, and Captain Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the UESC Endeavour, watching the stars blur past her ship. She had spent 20 years in space, exploring distant worlds and meeting peaceful alien races. But nothing prepared her for what was coming. The Cathara arrived without warning. Their fleet dropped out of hyperspace like dark daggers cutting through the fabric of reality. 15 massive warships surrounded Earth's moon, their hulls black as midnight, and covered with strange symbols that seemed to pulse with a threatening red light. Sarah received the emergency transmission while her ship was near Jupiter. Her hands shook as she listened to the message from Earth Command. The aliens wanted to meet. They called themselves the Cathara Empire, and they had ruled the galaxy for over 10,000 years. The Endeavour raced back to Earth at maximum speed. During the 3-day journey, Sarah studied everything they could learn about the Cathara. The information was terrifying. The Cathara were reptilian creatures, standing 7 feet tall with scales harder than steel. Their reflexes were 3 times faster than humans, and their strength was legendary. They were born predators, evolved on a brutal world where only the strongest survived. But the worst part was their philosophy. The Cathara believed in something they called Predator's Law. Every species in the galaxy was ranked by their fighting ability and hunting skills. The strong ruled the weak. The predators controlled the prey. It was simple and brutal. Sarah learned that dozens of alien civilizations had tried to fight the Cathara over the centuries. All of them failed. The Cathara military had never lost a war. They crushed resistance within weeks, sometimes days. Their warriors were trained from birth to fight and kill. Combat was their religion, victory their only god. When Sarah finally arrived at Earth, she was escorted to a massive meeting chamber built specifically for the occasion. The room could hold 1,000 people, but it felt small when the Cathara delegation entered. War Master Krixtal led the group. He was enormous, even for a Cathara. His scales were deep crimson, and his yellow eyes glowed with intelligence and cruelty. He moved with the fluid grace of a natural killer. Behind him came 12 Cathara warriors, each one deadly and impressive. The meeting began badly. Krixtal spoke in perfect English, his voice deep and threatening. He explained that the Cathara had observed humanity for several months. They conducted tests, watched human behavior, and studied human biology. Their conclusion was clear and insulting. Humans were prey species. Soft skin, weak muscles, slow reflexes, no natural weapons like claws or fangs. The Cathara had seen humanity's military capabilities and found them laughable. Human soldiers were fragile. Human weapons were primitive. Human tactics were predictable. Krixtal offered Earth a choice, though he made it clear it was not really a choice at all. Humanity could become a tributary species serving the Cathara Empire. Humans would provide resources, labor, and soldiers for the Cathara armies. In return, the Cathara would allow humanity to survive. They would not destroy Earth's cities or kill billions of people. The alternative was extinction. The Cathara would demonstrate their power by destroying every human colony in space. Then they would bombard Earth from orbit until nothing remained but ashes and memories. Krixtal delivered this threat with the casual confidence of someone who had done it many times before. Sarah sat through the meeting, her face calm, but her mind racing. She watched how the Cathara moved, how they spoke, how they thought. She noticed their arrogance, their absolute certainty that they were superior. She saw how they looked at humans with the same expression a lion might give a wounded rabbit. When it was her turn to speak, Sarah stood slowly. She was small compared to Krixtal, barely reaching his chest. But she met his eyes without fear. She asked for time to prepare Earth's response. She requested 6 months for humanity to organize the surrender ceremony, to prepare their people for the new reality, to accept their place in the galactic order. Krixtal found this amusing. His mouth opened in what might have been a smile, revealing rows of sharp teeth. He agreed immediately. 6 months was nothing to an empire that measured time in millennia. He had seen this before with other prey species. They always needed time to accept defeat, to understand that resistance was pointless. Some prey refused to accept reality until the very end. It made no difference. The result was always the same. The Cathara fleet withdrew to the edge of Earth's solar system. They would wait patiently for 6 months, and then they would return to accept humanity's submission. Krixtal felt generous. He was giving these weak creatures time to save themselves through surrender. He thought he was being merciful. But Krixtal made a critical mistake. He did not understand humans. He judged them by Cathara standards, by Predator's law. He saw weak prey that needed time to accept their fate. He never considered that prey might use that time differently. As the Cathara fleet disappeared into the darkness of space, Sarah contacted Earth Command. Her message was short and clear. The 6 months would not be spent preparing surrender. They would be spent preparing for war. Earth's leaders gathered in emergency sessions. Military commanders pulled out war plans that had been theoretical exercises. Scientists began designing new weapons. Engineers started building defenses. The entire human race mobilized with desperate speed. Sarah knew the truth that Krikstal had missed. Yes, humans were physically weaker than the Cathara. Yes, human reflexes were slower. Yes, human skin was soft and easily damaged. But humans had survived on Earth by being smart, not strong. Humanity had climbed to the top of Earth's food chain despite being weaker than lions, slower than cheetahs, and smaller than bears. Humans were persistence hunters. They did not need to be the strongest or fastest. They just needed to refuse to give up. They needed to outlast, outsmart, and outwork their enemies. They needed to turn their weaknesses into advantages. The Cathara thought they were giving prey time to accept death. Instead, they gave humanity time to prepare, and humans were very good at preparation. They had 6 months to get ready. 6 months to study their enemy. 6 months to plan their survival. The countdown began. 180 days until the Cathara returned. 180 days to find a way to defeat an enemy that had never lost. 180 days to prove that prey could bite back. Sarah looked at the stars and made a quiet promise. The Cathara had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years, but they had never met humanity before. They had never fought a species that refused to be prey. They were about to learn a hard lesson. Humans were not the strongest species in the galaxy, but they might be the most stubborn, and sometimes stubborn was enough. Part 2 Commander Marcus Webb stood in the war room deep beneath Geneva, staring at holographic displays showing the Cathara fleet positions. He had spent 40 years in military service, fighting in 3 different colonial conflicts. But those were human wars, fought with human rules. This was different. This was survival. The first month after the Cathara ultimatum was chaos. Earth's military leaders initially wanted to build bigger guns, faster ships, and stronger armor. They wanted to match Cathara's strength with human strength. Marcus knew this was wrong. He stood before the United Earth Council and told them the truth they did not want to hear. Humanity could not win a fair fight against the Cathara. The aliens were simply too strong, too fast, and too experienced. Any attempt to match them in traditional combat would end in disaster. Earth needed to fight differently. They needed to fight dirty. Marcus proposed a radical strategy. Instead of trying to be stronger predators, humans should embrace being prey. But prey that fought back, prey that set traps, prey that attacked when the predator was weak and ran when the predator was strong, prey that never, ever gave up. Dr. Yuki Tanaka's xenobiology team provided the scientific foundation for this strategy. They studied every piece of information about the Cathara, analyzing recordings from the meeting, examining biological samples left behind, and researching the few surviving records from other species that had fought the Empire. Yuki discovered critical weaknesses in the Cathara mindset. Their predator instincts made them aggressive and overconfident. They always chased fleeing prey. They always accepted challenges to combat. They believed so completely in their own superiority that they never adapted their tactics. The Cathara had won every war the same way for thousands of years. They expected their enemies to fight with honor, to stand and face them in battle. But humans had no honor when survival was at stake. Humans would cheat, lie, ambush, and run away. Humans would do whatever it took to win. The Cathara thought this made humans weak. Marcus understood it made humans dangerous. Earth's factories worked day and night, but they were not building the massive battleships that traditional military doctrine demanded. Instead, they built hundreds of small, fast ships, ships that could hit hard and run fast, ships that could hide in asteroid fields and attack from unexpected angles, ships that could work together like a pack of wolves hunting a bear. Sarah Chen trained the new fleet commanders in guerrilla tactics. She taught them to think like prey animals with teeth, never fight fair, never stand still, always have an escape route, attack supply lines instead of military bases, destroy support systems instead of engaging warriors directly, make the enemy chase you into traps. The 6 months passed quickly. Too quickly. Earth was not ready, not really. But ready or not, the Cathara were coming back. Their fleet appeared exactly on schedule. Dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system, 15 warships just like before. Crixtal expected to find a beaten species waiting to surrender. Instead, he found weapons platforms hidden throughout the solar system. Defense satellites that had been disguised as space debris, mining stations converted into military bases, and a human fleet that did not line up for honorable combat, but scattered like frightened birds, each ship heading in a different direction. Crixtal was confused at first, then angry. This was not how prey behaved. They were supposed to gather together for protection, not split up. But his instincts took over. The predator must chase. The Cathara fleet divided to pursue the fleeing human ships exactly as Marcus had planned. The Battle of Terra began. It was unlike any battle the Cathara had ever fought. Human ships did not engage in direct combat. They led the Cathara into asteroid fields where hidden weapons platforms waited. They fired missiles and then ran before the Cathara could respond. They worked in groups, 3 or 4 ships coordinating attacks on single Cathara vessels. When Cathara warriors tried to board human ships, they found the corridors rigged with traps and explosives. When Cathara captains tried to predict human movements, they found humans did not follow any logical pattern. They ran when they should fight. They fought when they should run. They were unpredictable and frustrating. Sarah commanded from the bridge of the Endeavor. Her ship led one of the Cathara battleships on a 3-day chase through the outer planets. The Cathara ship was faster and more powerful, but Sarah knew the solar system better. She led them past Jupiter, where hidden human bases launched surprise attacks. She dragged them near Saturn, where the rings provided cover for ambushes. She exhausted their fuel reserves and damaged their engines with hit-and-run tactics. The battle lasted 3 weeks. It was brutal. Humanity lost 60% of its fleet. Thousands of soldiers died. Space stations were destroyed. Colonies on Mars and the Moon took heavy damage. But the Cathara lost 40% of their fleet. 6 of their 15 warships were destroyed or too damaged to continue fighting. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Cathara retreated. Crixtal could not believe it. His fleet had superior weapons, superior warriors, and superior tactics. Yet these weak prey creatures had hurt him. Not defeated him, but hurt him enough to make continuing the battle too costly. The Cathara Empire had never retreated from prey before. As the remaining Cathara ships prepared to withdraw, Sarah broadcast a message across all frequencies. She wanted Crixtal to hear it. She wanted the entire galaxy to hear it. Her voice was calm but carried across space with absolute determination. She told the Cathara about humanity. She explained that humans were persistence predators from a world called Earth. For millions of years, human ancestors survived not by being strong or fast, but by refusing to quit. They chased prey for days until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. They outlasted predators who were bigger and stronger. They won by being stubborn beyond all reason. The Cathara could be stronger, Sarah said. They could be faster. They could be tougher and more skilled at combat. But humans would never stop. They would outlast the Cathara. They would outthink them. They would win because they refused to lose. Surrender was not in human nature. Giving up was not an option humanity accepted. Sarah ended her broadcast with a challenge. The Cathara could come back if they wanted. They could bring more ships, more warriors, more weapons. But every time they came to Earth, humans would make them bleed. Every battle would cost the Cathara resources and lives. Every victory would be expensive. And eventually, through pure stubborn persistence, humanity would find a way to win. The message spread across the galaxy faster than anyone expected. Other species heard it, species that the Cathara had conquered centuries ago. They heard that someone had fought the Cathara and survived. They heard that prey had made the apex predators retreat. For the first time in thousands of years, enslaved species began to hope. On Earth, the victory celebrations were brief. Marcus and Sarah both knew this was just the beginning. The Cathara would return, probably with a much larger fleet. But humanity had proven something important. They could fight. They could survive. They could hurt the empire that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia. Dr. Tanaka analyzed the battle data and confirmed what they suspected. The Cathara were physically superior in every way, but they were predictable. Their pride made them chase when they should withdraw. Their honor made them fight fair when they should adapt. Their ancient success made them arrogant and inflexible. Humans had none of these limitations. Humans would cheat without shame. They would run without dishonor. They would attack weakness without hesitation. And most importantly, they would keep fighting no matter how long it took. Persistence was humanity's superpower. Marcus began planning the next phase of the war. Defense was not enough. Earth needed to take the fight to the Cathara, to show the galaxy that humanity was not just surviving but actively resisting. They needed to attack Cathara territory and prove that prey could hunt predators. The declaration had been made. Humanity would not surrender. They would not submit. They would fight with every weapon, every strategy, and every dirty trick they could invent. The Cathara had dominated the stars for 10,000 years, but their reign was about to face its first real challenge. And somewhere in the dark between stars, War Master Krikstal sat on his command throne, staring at the damage reports from the Battle of Terra. His claws scraped against metal as rage built inside him. These humans had embarrassed him. They had made him retreat. He would make them pay for that insult. He would destroy their world so completely that nothing remained. But a small part of his mind, the part that had made him a successful war master, whispered a warning. These humans were different. They did not fight like prey. They fought like something the Cathara had never encountered before, and that made them dangerous in ways he did not yet understand. 6 months after the Battle of Terra, Commander Marcus Webb launched Operation Hornet's Nest. The strategy was simple and brutal. Since humanity could not defend every human colony in space, they would attack Cathara space instead. Make the Empire defend its own territory. Force them to spread their forces thin. Turn the hunters into the hunted. The first human strike force jumped into Cathara space and hit a major supply depot near the border. They did not attack the military garrison. Instead, they destroyed warehouses full of food, fuel, and equipment. Then they disappeared before Cathara reinforcements arrived. The entire raid took 40 minutes. The Cathara military command was furious but confused. This was not how wars were fought. Enemies were supposed to capture territory, hold positions, and defend strategic locations. The humans did none of these things. They attacked and vanished like ghosts. They hit targets that had no military value, but caused massive disruption to Cathara logistics. Over the next year, human fleets struck across Cathara space. They destroyed communication relays, leaving entire sectors unable to coordinate. They attacked trade routes, disrupting the economy. They sabotaged mining operations on remote worlds. They never stayed to fight when Cathara warships arrived. They just moved to the next target. Marcus called it pack tactics. Individual human ships were weak compared to Cathara vessels. But 3 or 4 human ships working together could overwhelm a single Cathara warship through coordinated attacks. They struck from multiple directions, divided enemy fire, and retreated if the fight turned against them. It was the way wolves hunted elk, and it drove the Cathara crazy. The Cathara tried to adapt. They sent larger fleets to guard important locations. But this meant fewer ships available for offensive operations. They increased patrols along trade routes, but human ships were small and fast, easy to hide in asteroid fields or behind planets. The Cathara were fighting an enemy they could not predict and could not catch. Then Saracen did something that changed everything. She began secretly contacting other species under Cathara control. The Empire ruled over dozens of alien civilizations, species that had been conquered centuries ago. Most of them were classified as prey species, considered too weak to resist Cathara dominance. Sarah's message to them was simple. Humans were proving that prey could fight back. The Cathara were not invincible. They could be hurt, frustrated, and forced to waste resources. And humanity was willing to share everything they learned. Weapons designs, tactical manuals, guerrilla warfare strategies, all free, no conditions attached. The first species to respond were the Veloxi, an insectoid race that had served the Cathara for 3,000 years. They were small, quick, and intelligent. The Cathara used them as technicians and engineers, never considering them a threat. This was a mistake. The Veloxi rebellion started with sabotage. Equipment began to fail mysteriously on Cathara ships. Weapon systems developed strange malfunctions. Computer networks crashed without explanation. By the time the Cathara realized what was happening, the Veloxi had already done massive damage to the Empire's infrastructure. Then the Harmoth joined the resistance. They were a peaceful species that the Cathara had conquered 200 years ago. The Harmoth were not natural fighters, but they controlled many agricultural worlds that fed the Cathara military. When they stopped producing food and began destroying crops instead, the Empire faced its first food shortage in millennia. More species rebelled. The Quellan, the Moravec, the Then, each one found their own way to resist. Some used sabotage, some used strikes and work slowdowns, some fled their worlds and joined human fleets, adding their knowledge and skills to the fight. The galaxy was changing, and the Cathara did not know how to stop it. War Master Crixtal faced an impossible situation. The Cathara military doctrine had no solutions for this kind of warfare. His warriors were trained for glorious combat, for defeating enemies in fair battle. They did not know how to fight shadows and saboteurs. They could not force cowards to stand and fight. The Cathara honor code made things worse. Adapting their tactics to match human methods would mean admitting that prey tactics were effective. It would mean acknowledging that the humans were not really prey at all. This was unthinkable. The entire Cathara society was built on the belief that they were superior, that Predator's law was absolute truth. So Crixtal made a brutal decision. If he could not catch the human fleets, he would destroy human colonies to draw them out. He would attack civilian populations, kill billions, and force the humans to defend static locations where his superior firepower could crush them. It was a strategy of terror, and he deployed it without hesitation. The Cathara attacked human colonies on the frontier. Small settlements, mining outposts, research stations, places that could not defend themselves. The attacks were horrific. Entire populations were killed from orbit. Worlds were left burning. Crixtal broadcast the destruction across the galaxy, warning that this was the price of resistance. But the strategy backfired. Instead of forcing humans to fight defensively, the atrocities only strengthened their resolve. Human forces did not rush to defend the colonies because they could not. They were too far away, too outnumbered. Instead, they escalated their attacks on Cathara space, hitting harder and more frequently. Every human colony destroyed was answered with 10 Cathara facilities blown up. More importantly, the Cathara brutality proved to other species that negotiation was impossible. There was no mercy in the Cathara Empire, no compromise, no peaceful coexistence. The only choices were submission or resistance. And resistance suddenly seemed possible, even practical. Dr. Tanaka's research team continued studying Cathara biology and psychology. They discovered that Cathara warriors had incredible burst speed and strength, but poor endurance. A Cathara could run faster than a human for 100 meters, but humans could run all day. This weakness could be exploited. Force them to chase, to expend energy, to exhaust themselves. Human weapons designers created new tools specifically for fighting Cathara, weapons that targeted their enhanced senses, making them vulnerable to sonic attacks and bright flashes, armor that could not stop Cathara claws but could slow them down enough for humans to escape, traps that exploited Cathara hunting instincts, luring them into deadly situations. 2 years after the Battle of Terra, the war had become a grinding stalemate. The Cathara still controlled most of the galaxy, but their control was slipping. They had to garrison troops on dozens of rebellious worlds. They had to guard supply lines that stretched across light years. They had to hunt human fleets that appeared and disappeared without warning. Humanity had not won any major battles. They had not captured Cathara territory. They had not destroyed the Empire's military power. But they had not lost either. They were still fighting, still resisting, still making the Cathara bleed for every small victory. Marcus stood in the war room, looking at strategic maps of the galaxy. The situation was exhausting. Human casualties were high. Resources were stretched thin. Many people wanted to negotiate, to find some compromise that would end the bloodshed. But Marcus knew negotiation was impossible. The Cathara only understood strength and submission. Weakness invited destruction. Sarah's voice came through the communication system. She was commanding a raid on a Cathara weapons depot in the Outer Rim. Her fleet had been fighting non-stop for 18 months, jumping from battle to battle, always moving, always attacking, never resting. Her crew was exhausted, but they kept going. That was the human way. Just keep going. The war was teaching both sides lessons. The Cathara learned that prey could be dangerous when cornered. That overwhelming strength could not solve every problem. That 10,000 years of victory had made them rigid and unable to adapt. These were painful lessons, and the Cathara Empire would pay dearly for learning them so late. Humanity learned different lessons. They learned they could fight enemies far stronger than themselves. They learned that stubbornness was a weapon, that refusing to give up was sometimes enough. They learned that the rest of the galaxy was watching, hoping and waiting for someone to challenge the predators who had ruled for so long. The galaxy was changing, slowly but surely. Species that had accepted slavery for centuries were beginning to resist. Trade routes that had been stable for millennia were now dangerous. The Cathara Empire was still powerful, still dangerous, but for the first time in its long history, it was being forced to defend itself, and somewhere in the vast darkness of space, human ships continued their endless hunt. They struck Cathara targets, retreated, regrouped, and struck again. They were persistence predators doing what they did best, wearing down their prey through endless, patient pursuit, never stopping, never surrendering, never accepting defeat. The question was no longer whether humanity could survive. They had already proven that. The question now was whether they could win, and if so, what price would the galaxy pay for that victory? Lieutenant Amara Okonkwo had spent 3 years working in intelligence, analyzing Cathara communications and tracking fleet movements. She was patient, methodical, and excellent at finding patterns in chaos, and one day she found something incredible. She discovered the location of Crixval Prime, the primary Cathara shipyard deep in their core territory. The shipyard was enormous, capable of producing dozens of warships every year. It was the heart of Cathara military power, protected by layers of defensive systems and surrounded by their most powerful fleets. No one had ever attacked it. No one had even tried. It was considered impossible to reach, let alone damage. Amara brought the information to Commander Webb. Marcus looked at the data for a long time, studying the defenses, calculating odds, considering options. Then he smiled. It was a dangerous smile, the kind that meant he was about to do something crazy. The plan Marcus proposed was audacious to the point of insanity. A multi-species coalition fleet would attack Crixval Prime directly. It would be a suicide mission. Most of the ships would not survive. But the symbolic value was immense. Prey species attacking the Cathara heartland would shake the entire galaxy. It would prove that nowhere was safe, that the Cathara could be reached even in their most protected space. Sarah Chen volunteered to lead the mission. She assembled a fleet unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships, of course, but also Veloxi fighters, Harmoth support vessels, Quellan scouts, and representatives from a dozen other species. Each brought their unique abilities and knowledge. Each had their own reasons for hating the Cathara. The coalition fleet numbered 200 ships. It was the largest force humanity had ever assembled, but it was still tiny compared to the Cathara defenses at Crixval Prime. The Cathara would see them coming from light years away. There was no way to hide an attack this large, and that was exactly the point. Marcus did not want to hide. He wanted the Cathara to see them. He wanted War Master Crixtal to see prey species marching boldly into the Empire's heartland. He wanted to trigger the Cathara hunting instincts to make them overreact, because overreaction was what Marcus was counting on. The coalition fleet jumped into Cathara space and began the long journey toward Crixval Prime. They did not try to hide. They broadcast their position and intentions openly. "We are coming for your shipyard," they announced. "We are prey who have become predators. Come and stop us if you can." The Cathara response was immediate and massive. War Master Crixtal ordered every available fleet to converge on Crixval Prime. He would crush this insult completely. He would destroy every ship in the coalition fleet and broadcast their destruction across the galaxy. No one would dare challenge the Cathara after witnessing such overwhelming power. The Cathara assembled the largest fleet in their history, over 100 warships, representing the bulk of their military power. They positioned themselves between the coalition fleet and Crixval Prime. When the prey arrived, the predators would be waiting, but the coalition fleet was not the real attack. It was the bait. While the Cathara focused all their attention on the incoming ships, they missed the real threat. Small human strike teams had infiltrated Cathara space months earlier. They traveled on civilian ships hiding among traders and refugees. They used false identities and forged documents, and they slowly, patiently made their way to Crixval Prime. These teams were specialists in sabotage and demolition. They knew they would not survive the mission. They accepted this. Some volunteers were soldiers seeking glory. Others were civilians who had lost families to Cathara attacks. All of them understood the importance of what they were doing. The teams reached Crixval Prime and began their work. They planted explosives in critical systems. They introduced computer viruses into the shipyard's network. They sabotaged fuel storage facilities and weakened structural supports. Then they waited for the signal. The Battle of Crixval Prime began when the Coalition fleet finally arrived and faced the Cathara Armada. The Cathara fleet was overwhelming, exactly as expected. The Coalition ships fought bravely but were being systematically destroyed. Sarah commanded from the Endeavor, leading her forces in desperate maneuvers, buying time following the plan. War Master Crixtal watched the battle from his flagship. He felt satisfaction as prey ships exploded under his fleet's weapons. This was how the universe was supposed to work. Predators dominated, prey died, order was restored. He had won just as the Cathara always won. Then Sarah sent the signal. Deep inside Crixval Prime, the sabotage teams activated their devices. Explosions rippled through the massive shipyard. Fuel tanks detonated in chain reactions. Half-built warships collapsed as their supports failed. Computer systems crashed, causing automated defenses to fire on their own facilities. The shipyard tore itself apart from within. The destruction was catastrophic. Crixval Prime had taken centuries to build and maintain the Cathara fleet for millennia. In less than an hour, it was reduced to burning wreckage. Worse, the explosion damaged many Cathara warships that were docked nearby. A quarter of Crixtal's fleet was destroyed or crippled by the cascading disaster. The Cathara fleet fell into chaos. They had focused entirely on the battle in front of them and never considered threats behind them. Their doctrine had no response for the situation. Should they continue destroying the Coalition fleet or return to save what remained of the shipyard? Should they chase the humans who were now fleeing or secure their damaged vessels? In the confusion, Sarah broadcast a message to War Master Crixtal. She challenged him to single combat. One human against one Cathara broadcast across the galaxy. If she won, the Cathara would withdraw from human space. If she lost, humanity would surrender. It was a challenge no Cathara could refuse. Their honor code demanded personal combat when challenged directly. Crixtal accepted immediately. He was confident beyond measure. He was a Cathara warrior trained from birth in combat. Sarah Chen was human, soft, and weak. The fight would last seconds. He would tear her apart with his claws and restore Cathara pride with her blood. The two leaders met on a neutral station, surrounded by observers from both sides and cameras broadcasting to every corner of the galaxy. Crixtal was massive, armored with natural scales, armed with claws that could cut through steel. Sarah looked tiny beside him, wearing light armor and carrying only a combat knife. The fight began. Crixtal attacked with overwhelming force, exactly as Sarah expected. She did not try to block or match his strength. Instead, she moved. She dodged, rolled, and evaded. Every attack missed by inches. She was slower than Crixtal, but faster than he anticipated. She was weaker, but more agile. Crixtal grew frustrated. Prey was supposed to stand and fight, not run away. He chased Sarah around the combat area, his attacks becoming more aggressive and less controlled. He was using his incredible burst speed and strength, burning through his energy reserves. 30 minutes passed. Then 40. Sarah kept moving, kept evading, kept forcing Crixtal to chase her. She was not trying to win quickly. She was trying to outlast him. She studied his patterns, learned his preferred attacks, memorized his movements, and she waited for him to tire. At 47 minutes, Sarah saw what she had been waiting for. Crixtal's movements were slower. His breathing was labored. The mighty Cathara warrior was exhausting himself, something he had never experienced in combat before. Cathara fought in quick, brutal battles. They were not built for endurance. Sarah stopped running. She turned to face Crixtal directly. When he attacked again, she did not dodge. She moved forward instead, inside his reach where his claws could not strike effectively. Her knife found the gaps in his scales, the weak points that Dr. Tanaka's research had identified. The cuts were not deep, but they did not need to be. They just needed to bleed. Crixtal roared in pain and rage. He could not believe what was happening. He was the strongest, the fastest, the most skilled. He was apex predator. But his strength was fading while the human seemed tireless. His speed was gone while she remained quick. His warrior's pride meant nothing against her patient persistence. The fight ended when Krixtal collapsed from exhaustion and blood loss. He was not dead, but he was defeated. Sarah stood over him, tired but standing. The galaxy watched in disbelief. The apex predator had fallen to prey. The impossible had happened. The Cathara Empire shattered that day, not from the physical defeat, though that was devastating, not from the loss of their shipyard, though that was crippling. The Empire broke because the myth of Cathara invincibility died with Krixtal's defeat. If one human could beat their greatest warrior, then Cathara superiority was a lie. Predator's law was false. Everything they believed was wrong. Across the galaxy, enslaved species rose in open rebellion. Cathara client worlds declared independence. The Empire's carefully maintained hierarchy collapsed. Some Cathara fought to the last, refusing to accept reality. Others surrendered, confused and broken by the revelation that they were not actually superior to everyone else. The war was not over. Fighting would continue for months, but the turning point had passed. The apex predators had fallen, defeated not by strength but by persistence, by refusing to give up, by being too stubborn to accept defeat. 1 year after the Battle of Krixval Prime, the galaxy was still adjusting to its new reality. The Cathara Empire had collapsed, fragmenting into dozens of independent Cathara worlds. Some Cathara chose peace and began the difficult process of learning to live as equals with other species. Others fought desperately to maintain the old ways. Refusing to accept that their era of dominance had ended, Admiral Sarah Chen, promoted after her victory over Krixtal, stood on the bridge of her flagship and watched reconstruction efforts on a former Cathara slave world. The Veloxi were rebuilding their civilization, finally free after 3,000 years of servitude. It was messy work, complicated and difficult, but it was their work now. Their choice. Their future. The war had taught everyone harsh lessons. For humanity, the lesson was that physical strength was not the only path to victory. Persistence, adaptability, and refusal to surrender could overcome seemingly impossible odds. For the Cathara, the lesson was even more painful. They learned that believing yourself superior did not make it true, that tradition and pride could become weaknesses, that evolution and adaptation were necessary for survival. The Free Species Coalition was officially established 6 months after the war ended. It was not a perfect organization. Member species argued constantly about rules, territory, and resources. Some wanted revenge against the Cathara. Others advocated for forgiveness and integration. Every decision required long debates and compromises that satisfied no one completely, but it was better than the alternative. Better than the old system where strength determined everything. Better than empires built on conquest and slavery. The coalition was chaotic and frustrating, but it gave every species a voice. It replaced Predator's law with something new and uncertain. Democracy was messy, but it was also the foundation for lasting peace. Commander Marcus Webb, now General Webb, established the Coalition Defense Academy on Earth. Its mission was to train military officers from all species in the tactics that had defeated the Cathara. Students learned about asymmetric warfare, guerrilla tactics, persistence hunting strategies, and the importance of adaptation. The Academy's motto was simple: never surrender. The first graduating class included humans, Veloxi, Harmuth, Quellan, and even a few Cathara who had chosen to embrace the new reality. These Cathara students struggled with the curriculum. Everything they learned contradicted their instincts and upbringing. But some of them persevered, determined to help their species find a new path forward. Dr. Yuki Tanaka founded the Institute of Predator Studies, dedicated to ensuring that no single species could ever dominate the galaxy again. The Institute studied not just physical threats but psychological and cultural dangers. They identified warning signs of supremacist thinking and developed educational programs to promote equality and cooperation among species. Lieutenant Amara Okonkwo became the Coalition's Chief of Intelligence, responsible for monitoring potential threats and maintaining galactic security. Her network of agents included members from every Coalition species. They watched for emerging dangers, investigated suspicious activities, and worked to prevent conflicts before they escalated into wars. Humanity found itself in an unexpected role. They were not rulers or conquerors. They did not try to build their own empire to replace the Catharas. Instead, humans became teachers, mediators, and defenders. They shared their knowledge freely, helped resolve disputes between species, and stood ready to defend the coalition against external threats. This surprised many species who expected humans to claim dominance after their victory. But humans remembered their own history. They knew that empires always fell eventually. They understood that cooperation was stronger than domination in the long term. And they genuinely believed that every species deserved freedom and dignity. Not everyone accepted the new order peacefully. Some Cathara warlords gathered fleets and tried to restore the empire through force. These attempts always failed, defeated by coalition forces using the same tactics humanity had pioneered. The warlords found themselves hunted by prey species who had learned to fight back effectively. Other threats emerged from outside coalition space. Pirate groups, rogue states, and opportunistic raiders tried to exploit the galactic chaos. But the coalition was ready. Ships from multiple species patrolled trade routes together. Mixed crews brought diverse skills and perspectives to every mission. The galaxy was learning to cooperate out of necessity, and discovering it worked better than anyone expected. Sarah spent much of her time visiting different worlds, building relationships and resolving conflicts. She discovered that defeating the Cathara militarily had been easier than building lasting peace. Peace required patience, compromise, and constant effort. There were days when she longed for the simple clarity of war, where problems could be solved with tactics and weapons. But she persevered. That was what humans did best. When progress was slow, they kept working. When negotiations seemed hopeless, they kept talking. When different species could not agree, humans found compromises. It was not glorious work, but it was necessary. Building was always harder than destroying. 5 years after the war ended, a monument was erected on the ruins of the Cathara homeworld. The planet had been devastated during the final battles, and most Cathara had abandoned it for colony worlds. But a small community remained, working to rebuild and remember. The monument was a massive sculpture showing two figures standing side by side. One was clearly human, the other Cathara. They were not fighting. They were not celebrating victory or mourning defeat. They were simply standing together, looking toward the stars. The statue represented hope that former enemies could become partners. The inscription was written in over 100 languages, representing every species in the coalition. It read, "From prey to predator to partner. May we never forget where we came from, or what we can become together." The words were simple, but carried profound meaning for everyone who read them. Sarah attended the monument's dedication ceremony, along with representatives from dozens of species. Surprisingly, several elderly Cathara warriors also attended, including some who had fought against humanity during the war. One of them approached Sarah after the ceremony. His name was Thralvin, and he had served under Warmaster Crixtal. Thralvin spoke quietly, his voice heavy with emotion. He told Sarah that the Cathara had been wrong. Their entire civilization had been built on a lie, on the false belief that strength made them superior. They had dominated the galaxy through force and called it justice. They had enslaved other species and called it natural order. Defeating them had been an act of mercy, even though it felt like destruction at the time. Sarah listened carefully. She did not offer easy forgiveness or claim moral superiority. She simply acknowledged his words and thanked him for his honesty. Change was hard, she said, especially changing beliefs that had defined an entire culture for millennia. But it was possible. Humans had changed many times throughout their history. They had overcome prejudice, abandoned harmful traditions, and learned to build more just societies. The Cathara could do the same. The conversation gave Sarah hope, not because it solved anything immediately, but because it showed that change was happening. One Cathara warrior questioning his culture's foundations was not much, but it was a start. And from small starts, great changes could grow. 10 years after the war, Admiral Sarah Chen addressed a gathering of young cadets at the Coalition Defense Academy. The audience included members from over 50 different species, all training to protect the fragile peace their parents had fought to create. Some were children of war heroes. Others came from worlds that had suffered under Cathara rule. A few were Cathara youth seeking to help their species find redemption. Sarah looked at the diverse crowd and felt pride mixed with concern. These young people would face challenges their generation could barely imagine. New threats would emerge. Old prejudices would resurface. The hard work of maintaining peace would test their dedication repeatedly. But she believed they were ready. or at least as ready as anyone could be. She told them the story of humanity's war against the Cathara. Not the simplified version taught in schools, but the real story with all its complexity. She talked about the fear when the Cathara first arrived, the desperation during the early battles, the grinding exhaustion of the guerrilla war, the terrible cost of victory. She did not glorify war or pretend it had been heroic adventure. War was brutal, terrifying, and tragic even when necessary, but she also told them the truth about why humanity won. Not because humans were stronger, faster, or more naturally gifted at combat. They won because they refused to accept defeat, because they adapted when adaptation was needed, because they outlasted an enemy that seemed invincible, because when faced with impossible odds, humans found ways to change the rules of the game. The Cathara lost because they could not imagine prey fighting back, Sarah explained. They were trapped by their own beliefs, unable to adapt when the universe proved them wrong. This was the real lesson of the war. Not that humans were special or superior, but that stubbornness, adaptability, and refusal to surrender could overcome even overwhelming force. Sarah ended her speech with a challenge to the cadets. The galaxy was watching them, she said.